You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome back to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast with myself, Owen Walker. This is the final episode of 3 human factors episodes on human factors in practice, indeed within critical care, and indeed just looking at human factors from a different perspective and a different colleague from a different service. So today I'm with Jim Walmsley. Jim is no stranger to the podcast and has been on with me before. Jim is a specialist paramedic in critical care. He has also worked in various non-government organisations. So he's worked around Europe and indeed across the world from 1996. In 2001, he also qualified as an international mountain leader. And he's spent the last 19 years as a qualified critical care paramedic. He has and is about to go to one of the leading air ambulance trusts within the UK and split his time between 2 different trusts working as a critical care retrieval practitioner. In the conversation, we're going to look at what human factors means, Jim. We're also going to look at a little bit more of focus around task and how what the interplay between human factors and task looks like. So task complexity, task variability, task duration and demands, feedback mechanisms, clearly defined goals, and then how we can design tasks to better serve clinicians. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Owen, and it's great to be back. Thank you for having me back. Yeah, it's a real pleasure.
Jim, could I just start with just looking at what human factors means to you?
Yeah, it's something that I don't profess to be any expert in at all. However, absolutely a part of our world, our life, my professional life. I don't see it as a rigid thing. I don't see it this idea of the Swiss cheese model. If you do this, this, and this, if you put these layers in, you will be a winner. You will succeed. There will be no error. And I don't see it like that. I just see it infinitely more complex. It just feels like it's infinite in the ability to adapt and change and evolve. And so it's based on things like latent factors. They're things like morale or confidence. We know that a culture eats policy, procedure, training for breakfast. So that's true. We know that there are errors that occur. And I just think for me, human factors is about looking at all of these layers. And there's a really good paper by Wilson and called the onion model. And I really like that because it just gives you the idea of layers, these different layers on top of each other. And then they have these external factors that also affect that onion. In another way, I think for me, there's been a before and after. The program that I have the privilege to work in as a specialist paramedic in critical care has really opened my eyes. And there's been a before. So when I started 19 years ago in the ambulance service here in the UK, it was about silos of working. They were almost silos, negative silos, working with stalwarts, not sharing information. This was in the day before sat-nav. I would have colleagues that would let me drive past an address to a property, to an incident, because I didn't have the A to Z knowledge of where I should be going, and that was a weakness. Admitting error openly, another sign of weakness. And so that was the era that I came from. If you had a certain look, if you dared to put the stethoscope around your neck, that incited a whole layer of situations about what that was saying about you and your approach. What has been after the program that I've been involved with for the last 10 years is really transformed my attitude, my approach, my belief, what I think are true around human factors and how we can improve on that. And what I mean by that is that we meet every 7 weeks. We call it clinical governance. It's a period of time every 7 weeks based on a rota. And we have 10 teams. And each CCP from line 1, for example, will meet from all 10 teams. And what we do is we have a Chatham House rules. We speak openly. We have a just culture. We encourage sharing, honesty. We own error. We analyze, we critique, we sweat the detail. And that can be quite hard to accept in the beginning. And certainly myself, and I have seen with colleagues who have come from the old into a system like this, really struggle, and the ego kick in. And you know, those egotistical sort of frustrations maybe not allow you to have a smooth transition to such an open environment. And this is nothing new. I was involved in this system 20 years ago when I was working offshore in the petroleum industry around the world, and they had a global reporting system. So if there was an accident that happened, you know, on one rig in one part of the world, that would then be disseminated across the hundreds and thousands of facilities so that that would not occur again. And I think very recently, it's been really exciting to have seen maybe the evolving of the after. For me, I've just been through a well-known HEMS crew course, and that was just really genuinely wonderful to have been put through. Yes, I was under pressure, but it was very well thought out. There was a real attention to individual learning and tailoring to that. So for example, on one of the days where we were put through moulages and simulation, we had an embedded faculty member that was an outside silent partner watching, was not critical, was not part of the faculty, but actually disseminated and facilitated extra learning, which we would do together while we were restocking, rechecking, ready for the next simulation. So that's my take on human factors. I think it's been quite a journey, and I suspect I will be on one more to come.
So I really like that, Jim. I really like you said, this peeling back of the layers of the onion to really understand the interlocking or overlapping procedures and tasks, but also the environmental and indeed individual human factors which contribute to performance. How fatigued are you? Like you said, you get together once every 7 weeks, right? Jim, what time of day or night was it? You know, was it 3 a.m. in the morning? What was the weather conditions like? What was the what how were you feeling? Were you fatigued? What night shift was it? So that, you know, that's one aspect, fatigue. Another aspect, you know, what would you done just before that, Jim? What were the rest of your night? What did that look like? Another aspect, what was the another layer of the onion? What was the communication like within the team that you were working in, that flash team? And these are all layers, like you said, you can peel back. And the true place of ownership is, like you said, is owning the errors, or indeed maybe the less than optimal performance in each of those, if you can mitigate each one, or indeed own each one, and then coming out with what the end result was. Because, and like you said, the heart of this, all this is about quality improvement, is about incremental improvement. What else can we do? You know, was I so fatigued I didn't realize that the ambulance was actually parked into the bay and actually needed to be turned around, so because that added an extra 30 seconds onto the pic. You know, all these incremental benefits that you can really shave off through ownership, through peeling back the layers of the onion, and indeed just reflection. And Jim, just looking at that and just bringing it into context, could you maybe speak to how human factors, or indeed task or environmental and or individual human factors have affected you in the past, how maybe you've articulated and reflected on that?
I mean, there are so many experiences, so many incidents. I think, and it's been really hard actually thinking about this. It's been really hard to try and pick out some some blinders. Really, I suppose they're all blinders. They're in their own way. I think one was literally recently was that I was tasked to an incident. It was a motorcyclist versus car. It was a significant major trauma, multi-trauma to the motorcyclist. And we were the first ambulance clinicians to scene. It was in quite a remote area of where I work. And then calling in the helicopter team, and then other colleagues like my ambulance colleagues working on an ambulance, and police. We didn't need fire rescue support. It was an exciting job. It was interesting. It was challenging. It was very positive in the system that I work in to deliver such exceptional care that I think made a massive difference for this individual, which we managed to get to the right hospital and the right care for part of that longer journey that they would be on. What was really interesting was that while I was minding my own business and clearing up and restocking, ready for the next job, I had a student paramedic. I'd sent them off with the crew, with the patient and the HEMS team to go to the helicopter, which was nearby, to load the patient onto the helicopter. And the police had cordoned off this section of road where the accident had happened. And before I knew it, and unbeknown to me, another ambulance had turned up and was wanting to drive through this scene that was cordoned off. I had a police colleague who was quite keen that he would not allow the ambulance through. And I said, look, I need to understand what is the problem with the patient and what is the severity. Can you please ask? And I think if it's a severe situation, based on my judgment, you have to let the ambulance through. The copper came back, the police officer came back and told me two statements. The patient is peri-arrest. Second statement was oxygen saturations of 50%. So needless to say, I asked that this ambulance was allowed through, and that I met the crew and the patient. Long story short, this was a patient that actually was in a really significantly unwell situation, was suffering with a chronic condition, so something like MND, essentially was presenting with a pneumothorax. And there'd been quite a delay. This patient was in extremis, and we were a long way from a hospital. And so I decided, after listening to the history and assessing the patient, that I was worried that this patient was tensioning. The individual had a tension pneumothorax, and I needed to decompress the chest. I did that, and the patient did improve, but then deteriorated again and went back to a poor baseline. So I called in a second helicopter and a second team, and they turned up. And long story to be made even shorter was that probably on balance, I didn't take the right approach with that patient, or certainly I could have nuanced my approach. Why is that? Basically, I was adrenalized from the last job. I didn't stop and take stock and, for example, use ultrasound to rule out a pneumothorax or even a tension pneumothorax, which could have helped me. I did try and expand my bandwidth. I tried to call our critical care desk and try and speak with either a fellow colleague or one of the doctors that we have as an on-call service. They weren't contactable, and so I ended up going down a rabbit hole where I felt very alone, and I was very worried that this patient would essentially go into cardiac arrest, so much so that I set it ready for a traumatic cardiac arrest, where I would then have to do something more severe like finger thoracostomies. So that's one job that's been recently, and I've tried to be honest, to own that and reflect, so much so that actually I made a point to go to the attending hospital, meet up with the crew and with the second HEMS team, and just really discuss and be open about my errors, and what I thought were my shortcomings there. The second incident has a huge influence on me personally. I find the factor of rudeness very difficult, and so another incident whereby I attended a paediatric who had choked on a meatball. This was a good number of years ago, and they had learning disabilities. They'd had spinal surgery. They had an intercisor distance of just over 2 fingers width. So essentially, you are finding it very difficult to intubate this patient. And it was very emotive. It was in a public place or in a place of service and care. And it was a real challenge. I managed to steer the resuscitation into a positive direction. We got a ROSC, or return of spontaneous circulation, managed to intubate the patient, managed to give a high level of care in conjunction with great support from colleagues, no doubt about it. And we managed to get this patient into hospital for further care and investigation. What was really interesting was, again, probably adrenalized from probably one of the most challenging jobs that I can think of from a clinical perspective. I was met by genuine rudeness by one of the hospital clinicians, who was I perceived to be very rude to me and very snappy. And I took umbrage to that in a professional way. There was nothing that was unprofessional, but it really absolutely brought me back down to a base layer of feeling. And I was just incredulous to how this colleague could behave after what I had been through and my colleagues. And I challenged this individual and took this individual outside of that facility to further discuss in what can be described as a robust conversation, Owen, about what my perspective was and what my perception was. And that for me, they're 2 examples of how human factors really do affect. And even when you think you've done a good job, and even when you think you've omitted latent factors or error or holes that might be in the so-called Swiss cheese. So I think they're 2 short examples. Happy to elaborate on those, but they, as have many, if not all incidents, been really strong learning lessons and learning journeys for me, and maybe more so because of my personality or my traits.
It's really interesting you say that, actually, Jim, because like you said, there's some cognitive biases and indeed anchoring biases in the first case, whereby you maybe you lost track of time, or indeed it's the situation awareness of right, what does this patient need now versus what they need in 10-15 minutes versus what can I mitigate when they get to hospital. And so it's that sort of situation awareness piece of time perspective, and again that speaks to task saturation, or indeed just that heuristic of being so engrossed and then forgetting actually the next 5-10 minute trajectory, 20-30 minute trajectory, and where are we, where do we need to be. And so I really kind of resonate with that. And the second, within the sort of attitude and how fatigue and or characterological personality can really influence performance and future performance as well, because like you said, what's going to come up in you when you see this practitioner in the future, if it's not resolved, is suboptimal performance, because actually there's going to be lots of anchored memories and or feelings that come up from that individual. And dealing with them in a debrief is far better to have some kind of conflict resolution. And just being honest with you, learning to do conflict well, and proactively, and so that it's not a negative and or derogatory experience. It's actually done in a positive way, and that we can both learn from. And I'm still on that journey, but learning to do conflict well, taking it away from the individual, putting it on the table, saying, look, these are the endpoints we both want to get to. This is from my perspective what I saw, but it's that piece around coming to predefined endpoints. Jim, could I just ask you, there's plenty of things you do in your day-to-day practice, around you do meticulous kit checks against a checklist at the start of your shifts, as part of any high performing service. Could I get, there's these regular attenders in task human factors around unfamiliarity with tasks, so these kind of halo, high acuity, low occurrence tasks, which we might only do once or twice in our career. Inexperience, shortage of time, inadequate checking, poor procedures. So how can we address these in your mind?
So I think, if I may just talk about some of the more common things that we do and how we can have an ability to address those tasks or factors to try and make them the best that they can. I think for me, having a system is genuinely important, and I call it a scaffold. I've spoken about this before. Having a scaffold. So, for example, some of my colleagues that have been out observing, or our student paramedics, I talk about the 2 R's and the 3 P's. What is that? Well, that's rapport with crew, rapport with a patient, an exquisite primary survey, and from that you're going to come up with a plan suggest and a plan deploy. Use that every time, because it doesn't fail you. It doesn't let you down. It addresses all of the factors that might come up to bite you in the derriere. And it might be that you can't do a rapport with crew because there's an immediate task that needs to be done, and then you do that afterwards. So it doesn't have to be rigid. I think the other thing to do is sweat the small stuff. I think that is super important. There tends to be personality traits with roles and professions, and certainly I'm not alone in the program with being slightly fastidious and slightly wishing to look at attention to detail. And what I mean by that is that be happy to do. As you've said, we do daily checks and checklists. We tag our kit, retag it. For example, one of the drug bags that we carry that carry the extended drugs that we use as specialists, I check that and then tag it, so that I know that if it's been opened, I know it's been opened. I can see that just by looking at the bag, as one example. Learn to see the benefit of menial tasks like checking kit. It allows you to understand where the kit is, so that when you have one of these halo incidents, you know exactly where the kit is. And we've had an incident recently with a colleague or with a crew within my organisation where they've not been able to find a significant piece of equipment for a major hemorrhage for a patient that they attended to. And why is that? Because we've moved from one type of bag system to a new system, and where we thought, or where we used to keep the major hemorrhage kit, is now being split. So those are things that are really helpful. I think we might sort of talk about some of these more complex scenarios that as you've referred to as being a halo situation. I think within the program that I work in, and what we've evolved to try and do is have a system that is simple, that doesn't judge, that we focus on what we believe to be true. So that is clinical care. It's pretty simple, and to have a high standard of delivery. It's not easy, but I work within a trust, within an organisation that has very simple targets placed on it from a national perspective, from a regulator perspective. So, for example, we're judged by how quickly we get to a patient. That's a fundamental target that we can't move away from. So that that is something that can compound our program and is a constant pressure. But putting that aside, by being able to be in a different directorate, it allows us to focus on clinical care. And so if we look at front of neck access as a halo procedure, that is something that we skill drill every 7 weeks, or certainly as often as we can. Sometimes it's bumped onto another clinical governance week because we might have a new piece of kit or a new SOP or clinical practice guideline that we want to practice. We look at when things go wrong. So we've evolved our skills assurance time. So we've been finding by auditing and reviewing, interviewing, publishing on FONA, there's a publication that my program's published around FONA and the psychology. We know that we probably didn't train enough when things go wrong. What if you don't get access to that trachea after you've made an incision with a scalpel? So I think that there's some of the things that can really help, whether they're a halo procedure or just the mundane. It's about knowing, actually, my colleague who was on a night shift handing over to me on a day shift, everything okay? Yeah, it's great, Jim, don't worry. Yeah, all ready to go. And if you don't do those checks, you then later realize that the bottle of oxygen that you need in your primary bag is a tenth full, and they forgot. They, by no malice, just totally forgot to say, oh, actually, I didn't get a chance to change that bottle of oxygen. So again, really happy to evolve and elaborate on any of those points, Owen.
No, Jim, you make a great point there. It's not just about the halo, so the high acuity, low occurrence. It's actually about the hey-ho, so the high acuity, high occurrence kind of interventions, because there's still gains you can make within the high acuity, high occurrence. There's still incremental improvements you can make from looking at those incidents, and also, in case review. What is it about the bread and butter work we're doing that we can improve? And I think any high performing team needs to ask that question, because just because we're doing it frequently doesn't always mean we're doing it optimally. And there is stuff that you can cleave from other services or from critique from other people. So I fundamentally agree with that. And to your point around sort of checking kit, and the devil is in the detail with kit, and I absolutely agree with that. But just pivoting slightly and looking at how you mitigate tasks on scene, or indeed I say mitigate or delegate tasks on scene, because Jim, you're turning up to, and will be turning up to, as part of this new air ambulance that you're working with, some really high acuity work. People peri-arrest, or indeed in cardiac arrest. Lots of jobs to be done. Some that you will have to do, which are truly quite complex and becoming more complex. How do you approach complex task acquisition, and indeed how do you share tasks within the team so that actually we can still keep a semblance of simple movement forward within a scene?
So I think I think there are so many strands to this. There really are, and we know this. This is a simple concept to understand. Some of the things that I find that can really help are, don't do what can be done by others. And there are some really, certainly in discussion with colleagues, there's some really good courses that really elaborate on that. So for example, if you go on an emergency trauma course, it's very much about how you manage a team of clinicians, professionals, experts, specialists. So I think that's vitally important. And you can then substrate that down again. So I had an incident the other day where I had an international paramedic colleague who's new to the country and the system that we work in, that needs support and development. I had a student paramedic out observing with me. We have other colleagues that are coming from different places. And so you can substrate that down again. And so you might sort of break that workload down in different ways and just say, maybe to the student paramedic, look, I want to let the international paramedic do this and take this. Can you do this and help me with this? And we'll talk about the other factors later. I think no one's a mind reader, and I've seen some really beautiful ways of communication from some of the best in class, and they can include things like, listen guys, just stop what you're doing, just need a heads up, let's take 10 seconds out. You know, this analogy of you know, slow is fast, fast is slow. Let's just take 10 seconds out, guys. This is where I am, this is what needs to be done, these are the priorities. Person X, can you do Y? Person A, can you do B? Everyone happy with that? Let's regroup. That really helps. I think some of the really best in class that I've seen, when they've really found themselves up against it and they're back against the wall from high acuity complex incidents, they might say something like, my bandwidth is really filling up, I just need some time out. Let's just concentrate on what we need to do here. Let's refocus. We spoke about the structures, having that scaffold, I think they really help. But having a target, so if you can break this complex nature of an incident or patient or pathology down, give yourself a target. We will do this as a plan, suggest, plan, deploy, until we lose verbal contact. So if the patient loses, is not able to speak or verbalize, we're assuming a reduction in consciousness, GCS, cardiovascular status. And then what we'll do is we'll then do this as a plan, suggest, plan, deploy. So I think they can be things that work really well. I think what else is there? Being able to, I mean, this is a trick that is being spoken about by some of the best of HEM systems. Certainly, this idea that just walk away from the incident, step aside, so you can generate space and bandwidth and time and clarity of thought. And I often do that. I do that as much as I can. So it might be, I would like to make a top cover call to one of our consultants. I'm actually going to sit in the front of the cab space of an ambulance and write down an SBAR and really come up with what it is that I think needs to be discussed with a colleague as part of the shared decision process. So I think there's some of the things that can be really helpful.
Just looking at, Jim, mental fatigue and how that plays into task acquisition and task execution. Could you maybe speak to how you approach that? Because, you know, 4 a.m. on the third night shift is not the same as 4 p.m. on the first night shift. Yeah.
So I'm one of those individuals that on the night shift, the first night shift, I struggle. On the second night shift and I'm better. So some of the things that I really try to dial in to help are have a normal day leading into the first night shift, but really have time out, read a book, watch a film, have a sleep, and have a good quality nap and sleep before I start that night shift. So that's a simple example of how I try and improve my ability to perform on what is an unnatural time frame in the day. Some of the other things that really help me are more around so-called well-being or survivability or maintaining sanity, are being really honest with myself. So I'm a man that wears his heart on his sleeve, and so I try and use that to my advantage. I'm careful with who I talk to. I don't show that heart to everyone, but if someone asks, and if it's within me, I'm pretty honest, without being a burden or being a party pooper because I've just been to a tough job. Equally, having a variety of support base. So, for example, I've got friends and support structures in many different walks of life. So, for example, I've been out with a dear friend, kite surfing, who is a shepherdess, and she runs a farm and looks after over 300 sheep. Couldn't be any different to my day job, and it's fantastic, really refreshing. And I really try and certainly behave in a humble and honest way to encourage forgiveness and kindness. And I try and do that with my colleagues and peers. And I hope and I expect that in return, because I will not always get it right, and I will make error. And I don't know if we're going to touch on it later, but I try and own the error. So, like that incident I spoke about earlier, own it, accept it. I can think of another incident where there were 3 paramedics. I was the 4th. We had quite an unwell patient. And then essentially, I was trying to facilitate and support development and learning with my colleagues. What I omitted to do was to do an exquisite primary survey, and I delegated that out, and we missed assessing the pupils. And if I hadn't have missed that, I would have realised what the problem was. It wasn't too much of a problem, and we managed this patient well. We got them into hospital under the banner of being peri-arrest. But it just really showed me that actually I felt I made an error, I'd slipped up, and that was my responsibility. And so as a result, I went around each and every colleague, and particularly the paramedics, and apologized for the error that I made. That was my fault. I should have done X, Y, or Z, and I'd like to own that, and I'd like to apologize. And I think that fosters then in the future an openness with colleagues who you then hope to be open with you. There'll be no hierarchical error and good teamwork. And they see good traits. They see hopefully that earnest, humble, honest approach, which hopefully will motivate.
Absolutely, Jim. And I think, like you said, modeling what you want to see back from people is key. So that actually that humility piece, the active listening piece, and sort of modeling that to them so that you hopefully see it back from them. But just looking at mechanisms that you put in place. So you said one of the mechanisms to mitigate sort of task human factors is extensive kit checking. Another one that you referred to, Jim, was use of checklists mitigates task human factors. But could you maybe speak to others whereby there are either contemporaneous feedback mechanisms, so feedback mechanisms in the moment, or indeed feedback mechanisms that you or the scheme has articulated from case review that are actually robust and should be in place whenever you're executing one of these complex and or surgical tasks?
I think we've really tried to be open and honest and evolve with this. We're no means perfect, and we're definitely on a journey. Some of the processes and systems and checks that we have are, for example, we have a welfare email system that reports to all the team leaders. I'm a team leader with the program, and so if we have a colleague that's been to a difficult job, we report that and flag that up with all the team leaders and the senior managers. And we look after a team, we look after individuals, and we cross over. So we make sure that colleagues who are going to high acuity work are not forgotten about, not sort of swept under the carpet, because the system carries on and is never ending. So that's one of the things that we do. We encourage quite unique relationships. So it might be myself or even 2 critical care paramedics. They have a system where they might have a code by text. If I text the word blue, in a sentence that doesn't make sense or blue on its own, it means I need to talk to you when I call you. So do you mind just picking up the phone if I call you? It's urgent. We encourage variability of work phases. So what I mean by that is that we really support colleagues who might need time off, time out. They might go off and do other strands of workload. So they might go and work in clinical education or work on a project, and that can be really helpful. We really support what we call peer-to-peer. So every 7 weeks, we support and foster CCPs to work with each other, and that to be a formal process. So it's not just a jolly and a ride out, but we ask that each incident has a main or a lead CCP and the second observing, supporting, and then that's debriefed and formalized in the mini reports. But the point is that we really encourage silos of working, hopefully positive, and that's shared. It's great for morale. As you know, Owen, watching other people is great. You pick up on things that you really like, terms of phrase or a way of doing something, and that's immeasurable. That's absolutely fantastic. We really see the value of probably impromptu debrief areas. So, for example, on shift handover, that tends to not be rushed unless there's a time critical incident that has come in, and we allow that to be as natural as possible because it's vitally important. And it reduces loneliness if you don't hand over to someone, which would happen. So those are some of the things that we do. We have our top cover consultant group come to our clinical governance weeks and provide external validity to what it is that we do. So it's not just us judging and critiquing ourselves, but we get an outside view. We have outside speakers. So those are some of the things that really do help.
So Jim, what feedback mechanisms are there in place or that you put in place to try and safeguard against task human factors?
Within our clinical governance system, we debrief our work, we analyze, we look at downloads, give a drug, what did the observations do, what did the patient do. We use systems like Simbulance. So the last time I used Simbulance was to have video recording of doing a front of neck, and it was a scenario, and each colleague had to deal with that. And so, as they say, the camera never lies. And so it was just fascinating because you think that you speak in a certain way, or you might be good at a task, or this or that or the other. And it was all confidential. Each individual, each CCP came in one at a time. Each video was then recorded onto like a USB card, which they then kept. So we can use systems like that. We have a regular weekly seat on our local air ambulance charity. So we work with others in a different system to really elaborate, expand, and develop ourselves as individuals. We might, or hopefully we do as clinicians. I can think of a job in mind where I turned up to a pediatric patient that was in status, had a trachea on a ventilator, and it might be that we might use a system like DOPES and say, and be, okay, guys, target is let's manage this status. Let's get this back under control. Oh, now we have a new problem here with the respiratory failure. Okay, this is what we're going to do, guys. I'm going to work through dopes, and we're going to do this together and deal with the task as a team, but be guided by myself or another CCP. So they're some of the immediate things that I can think about. Something that I only did the other day, maybe as another example, giving intravenous paracetamol to a pediatric patient. It means doing a drug calculation. It means cross-checking that calculation. It means delivering the right drug, the right concentration, the right dose, the right volume. And so with the IVP, I said to my colleague, I really tried to sort of work through it without giving answers. So can you confirm what this drug is? Well, it's paracetamol, Jim. It's a 100 milliliter bottle. I only want 50 milliliters, which is 500 milligrams. So that's half a bottle. Do you concur, or practice such as? And so hopefully that deals with error in the best way possible. And I think one of the analogies from some of our colleagues that they use, and certainly teams that work together, and it's the HEMS model that I have in mind. The idea is that they work to SOPs, standard operating procedures. We call them clinical practice guidelines. And the idea is that if there's one out of that two that's having a bad day, it's still not going to be a poor delivery of service. And so the system is set up to try and deal with these latent factors that quite frankly happen. Humans mess up, but it's about trying to minimize that. So that if the doc is having a bad day or the para, then there are systems in play to reduce the overall effects of what could be a catastrophe.
So I really like some of those, some of those mitigation strategies that you were mentioning, and indeed just looking at the communication piece, actually, Jim, for a short while, and how that plays into your practice. You said a number of things there around sort of checking kits, and indeed the way that you orchestrate the scene, but also that self-acknowledgement of how you are performing as an individual. And indeed, do you feel like it's you're suboptimal, or indeed do you feel can you share that, as you said before? Is there a way of sharing all the tasks that need to be done in a fashion which is both understood and closed loop? But could you speak to the communication piece, Jim? You've worked with some fantastic clinicians in the past that have really communicated succinctly, politely, even under incremental pressure, come to that predefined endpoint and done it in a way which is cohesive. But can you speak to how you sort of share the mental model, some of the communication features that you orchestrate in practice, and how you execute it?
It does depend on what you find is acceptable. So as an example, it might be you are first seen to a patient that potentially has serious injuries, and you've got a helicopter team coming in, and you can hear it and you can see the helicopter, and you've got colleagues who are trundling a stretcher along a difficult piece of terrain and haven't managed to get to the patient yet. And so what you can, it might be that you say, listen, guys, let's just ditch the ambulance stretcher. We need to get to the patient. Let's do a quick assessment. Let's think about those 2 R's. Let's think about the three P's, and let's see how we go with that. It's about delegating that workload, and so I might say to one of my colleagues, do you mind doing a primary survey? And in the background, you're asking someone else to deal with the background distractors, which might be noise or bystanders or I don't know, horses that are running around. And you then update the control room and tell the desk controlling the helicopter, can we keep that helicopter in the overhead for them to not land on scene? We'll get you an update. We just need 5 minutes. We just need, and I don't need to articulate a time frame. This is my plan. So each of those things in combination together give you marginal gains, which focus the pointed bit of clinical care to be the best that it can be. Let's get that assessment, because it could easily be that we don't need the team by helicopter with what the extra they bring, and we can deal with this patient in a fantastic manner, and all is in hand. And it might be that you know, on that primary survey something is missed, but you might accept that, or you might overview that primary survey being done. You might empower a colleague. You might just get in the cannula into this patient. I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to do that. I'll be back in a minute. And you might, you know, you have to accept that they might not get that cannula in, and that's okay. We'll look for another point of access, or another way, another route, like intranasal. So I think I think I have a personal style, I suppose, like we all do. We all have our own way. I try to be sincere, try to be honest, try to be humble. I won't do anything that I don't mind doing myself. And sometimes you can say things like, listen guys, I need to get out. We need this patient out in 5 minutes. You know, I want the package now at the house, and I'm on our way in 5 minutes. Privately, it might be that you're happy with 10 minutes, but you're wanting to put a focus on, and that's the priority at that moment. So it might be a rhetorical question. What do you think, guys? This is where I'm coming from. What's your thoughts? A really lovely turn of phrase I really like is when seniors or other colleagues turn up to me and they'll say, what's your plan? What's your plan, Jim? What were you thinking? And that's really empowering. And I think maybe it's about empowering the team, but keeping focus and being that sort of shepherd's dog, that sheepdog, and just a nudge here and a nudge there to get it going in the right direction.
Jim, something you said about cross-checking of drugs as well is actually key. You know, just saying, you know, rather than saying this is adrenaline 1 in 1,000 or adrenaline 1 in 10,000, you know, what is this drug? Because what you're doing is you're firing off the person's attention to reciprocate. Yeah, this is X drug, and it's that read receipt, and it's also shared situation awareness. But there's what you're trying to do is mitigate your error by getting by delegating and recruiting their attention, their active attention as to what this drug is, because they got to physically read it. And so I really like that. And I also like you said the non-technical piece around not your ability and indeed willingness to do any of the tasks that are involved and that are needed. Hopefully, like you said, you can move to the level of your ceiling of care, and you can delegate people to their ceiling of care. So everyone's working to their ceiling of care. And then, you know, what you're doing is then distributing the workload appropriately to people's skill sets. But actually, if everything else has been done, you don't mind getting that cannula in, or drawing that drug up, or putting that seatbelt on, or wheeling the patient into the ambulance. It's not about anything's beyond you. And I very much an advocate myself of that sort of servant leadership style, because I think it shows the team that nothing is beyond any of us. And actually what we're trying to do is plug the gaps and bring that patient to their endpoint quicker. So Jim, as we start to look at coming into land on the interview, could you maybe speak to just some seminal take-home messages for listeners that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, of course. I think I think one of the first take-home messages for me are, don't be so naive to think that there is a model or an explanation that is universally applicable. I think that is a wishful think or thinking, and be open to the idea that this is infinite, but that we can actually make things better with some of the systems we've spoken about, or an attitude or culture, an approach. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, I suppose, is have systems that are routine and repeated. I find that very helpful. I always try and have a roll of tape on my belt. I really try and make sure that the end, a bit like, when you go to a roll of sellotape, you can't find the end to unpick. I try and have one corner folded over so it's easy to get to. I carry 4 tourniquets, disposable tourniquets, 2 that go above and on the mid forearms and 2 above the ACFs. And then theoretically, I'm improving my chance of cannulation 4-fold, not just one-fold. We spoke about simple structures. I'm a big fan of having a scaffold or multiple different simple scaffolds. Have scaffolds that help. An example might be blood on the floor and 4 more. Those are the things that we worry about when it comes to major hemorrhage. If there's hemorrhage from elsewhere, like a lower limb, or that isn't going to be life-threatening, certainly not in normality. Have redundancy. A big thing that I try and do is have redundancy in my system. So a really simple and silly example is I have drugs, I have acronyms like DOPEs saved as a contact on my phone. So I might be en route to a job that I'm not driving. I can look this up. I can look up information. I'm thinking, okay, this is a head injury. What's the map that we would want for a patient as a target? Because we spoke about targets. I have a guideline that is official, but what if I can't get to that, or the software doesn't reboot, or where some of our CPGs are, they're based on they need a network. Delegate, direct, deconstruct negative bias, and I really challenge when you hear something like, oh, well, I'm only a ECSW, a care support worker, I'm only this. I openly challenge that, and I go, forget that. What I want from you, and I would like from you, is to be complete eyes and support for the paramedic, because the paramedic might have 10 things going through their mind, and your role and your superpower and you being brilliant in this team is actually generating the space and the thinking power, or saying, actually, paramedic, I need you to go off and look at the drug count for this pediatric patient. I'm going to go off and do it the same. Let's meet in the middle. I think successful teams thrive on engagement. We know they do. And we can look at theories that have been brought by people like Lencioni, where they talk about certain factors that have an influence on interplay and teams and individuals, but successful teams thrive on that engagement and discussion. So create the space for them. And yeah, lastly, don't think that the active errors may be the dominant factor. They are important, they happen, we know, and that's why we're talking about this today. But latent conditions are clearly important. And just simply, you know what, Owen, sometimes people just slip up, and that's okay.
Absolutely, Jim. And like you said, giving people permission to make mistakes, actually, and permission for yourself to make mistakes and move through those once you've articulated that. But that ownership piece you were mentioning earlier is powerful as well. Jim, I'm mindful we've gone over time, and it's been fantastic talking to you, just getting your insights again on human factors. This is the last of the 3 pieces on human factors, and I really feel like we've squared off some of the sort of fantastic areas in which we can really learn from people like yourself, from practice and from your reflections. So thank you for the last hour, Jim.
It's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much, Owen, for having me along. It's been brilliant, and I look forward to another opportunity.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.